Hello again. A few things to share today. First of all, that last clip was me responding to some correspondence from another YouTuber, Always Analog, whose channel I have recommended and continue to recommend. It's my favorite pencil-related channel, and not only pencil related, he also from time to time will review a classic manual typewriter, which is another passion of mine, I guess. So I was responding to correspondence from him. He had sent me a very nice handwritten letter, which was in turn in response to a package of some pencils that I had sent him just as a thank you for all the good content he was putting out, and because I wanted his take on some pencils that are my favorites. So kind of a selfish maybe reason for that, but he had sent this very nice couple pages handwritten in pencil, and I wanted to share this. I hope he doesn't mind. I'm not going to show anything too much, but he just has the most impressive handwriting. I don't know if he always writes with pencil, but his handwriting is really nice. I wish I could write that well. So thank you, Always Analog, for that. And I completed and sent off a letter to you, and you should be receiving that shortly. That was typed on my Smith Corona Skywriter, if you couldn't tell by watching, which I repainted because it was in pretty rough shape, but it still types and works like a dream. For those of you who maybe don't know, the Skywriter was sort of marketed, maybe rather optimistically, as a typewriter that you could use on an airplane. So this was in the early days of commercial air travel. Can you imagine plopping down in your seat on Delta or United or whatever, and the gentleman sitting next to you pulls out a typewriter and begins to type out some correspondence? That might get you worse treatment than not wearing a mask. I'm not sure which should be worse. So anyway, that was what that initial clip was. Always Analog also sent me, in all of his pencil reviews, he starts off, he has this introductory segment where he writes the name of his channel. Let me get that a little bit better focused. He writes out the name of his channel and the name of the pencil he's reviewing, and he sent me this from that video he made. This is a pencil I sent him. So yeah, it's kind of fanboyish for me to keep that, which I'm a little too old for, fanboyism, but it was awesome that he sent that. So thank you very much, Always Analog, and I'll continue to recommend your channel because it's just some great content. And speaking of letters, I want to do a quick look today at this book that I found at my local thrift, my favorite, most frequented haunt for Bibles and prayer books and the like. And this was something that caught my eye. I don't remember how much I paid for this, but I'm certain it wasn't more than $2. I believe it might have been $1.50 or $2. This was probably in the antique book section rather than the separate Bible section. So this is the 20th Century New Testament Part 2. This was a project done in the very end of the 19th century and first year or two of the 20th century. That was done in 3 parts, and I think later released as a complete volume with all 3 parts of the New Testament together. It's a cloth cover. It is well bound. There's a sewn binding. I'm try to get a better focus here. So it is built to last, but you can see 20th century New Testament, a translation into modern English made from the original Greek, Westcott and Hort's text, which at that time was the new hotness, I guess. In 3 parts. This is part 2, Paul's letters to the churches. Fleming H. Revell Company, or Revel, publishers of evangelical literature. You can see the stitching there. Holding it together rather well for 120 years old. Copyright 1900 by Fleming Revell Company, Caxton Press, New York. The preface reads in part, I'm just going to read a couple of things here of interest. In response to many urgent requests from readers of part 1 of this translation, we have departed from our original intention of issuing the work in 2 volumes and are publishing these letters of St. Paul to the churches without waiting to complete our version of the remainder of the New Testament. So it's kind of, like the band that has to issue a new album because fan support is so tremendous. They just rushed out. It kind of makes sense that you have all of Paul's epistles in 1 volume. So the final paragraph here in the introduction, we thankfully acknowledge helpful criticism received from many quarters, and we have been greatly encouraged by numerous testimonies to the benefits resulting from our presentation of the historical books of the New Testament in language free from obsolete words and idioms. In issuing this further installment of our work, we again commend our undertaking to the blessings of Almighty God. Signed, the translators. And there's no list of translators here that I can see anywhere. Maybe the first volume had that, but just a little research online, basically Wikipedia, because I could find very little on this translation, apart from a very brief article in Wikipedia that mentions this was, they had like 20 translators, and it says something like, although they were all fluent in the Koine Greek of the New Testament, the translators were not professional scholars, but a varied cross-section of society: ministers, housewives, school teachers, railroad workers, and businessmen. However, they shared the desire to enable Englishmen to read the most important part of their Bible in the form of their own language, which they themselves use. And I was reading that from Wikipedia. So I like that. I like that a lot. This, for some reason, brings to mind another great YouTuber whose channel I subscribe to, and you should too if you don't. Biblical Studies and Reviews, and I'll try to put a link. I'm sure anyone watching mine probably has already subscribed to his channel. I just remember one of his videos as he's sitting in front of this enormous, impressive collection of biblical studies books in his personal library, and he's speaking very eloquently about his, search for and his work with various translations and the Greek, etc. And in at least one video mentions that he's not a theologian. He's not a Greek or Hebrew expert. He's a plumber, which I just think is so fantastic. And we need a little more of that. We get high-sounding language from some of these publishers that bring out translation after translation, and I've got some of them here that I'm going to review at some point, where they assure us that finally a Bible in the language of the common man, of the people, which sounds great, but it's this kind of almost feigned populism that, if you stop and think about it, they take some time to hand down to us from, Mount Sinai of the university that they happen to be tenured at, and they hand down to us a Bible in the, quote, common language of the people. Well, you know what? The common people can do a pretty good job sometimes of translating on their own, and from what I read of this, I rather like their work. So, really interesting to find this. I'm sure you can find the text of it online since it's well outside the copyright period. There's a introduction to each of the letters, and interestingly they have arranged it in what they're considering kind of chronological order of when the letters were written by Paul. So first is the Thessalonians, kind of in the first group, and then what they're calling the second group of letters is Romans, Corinthians, and Galatians, although they say they don't necessarily know which order these were written in, but they believe that Thessalonians was written before these four letters. Obviously, First Corinthians was written before Second Corinthians, but you get the point. And again, just these introductions that give you kind of a historical context for the book. There are cross-references and footnotes in very tiny type here. Just reading through it, it still feels maybe mildly dated, but there's another quote on Wikipedia from Bruce Metzger of New Oxford fame, among other things, saying basically that 100 years later, this text still feels, good. I mean, it still reads well. It held up really well over 100 years. So I look forward to continuing to read in this, but what I have read so far, I just like it. I like the idea. A Bible produced by the common man for the common man, and just a quality work. So if you happen to see one of these, if you see volume 1 or 3, let me know, because I'd kind of like the whole thing. But I'm glad the one I did find was Paul's letters. Anyway, just a good look at that. That is still in beautiful shape after 120 years. So thanks for joining me for this brief tour of this, and maybe I'll go over some of these other ivory tower produced for the common man Bibles soon. Thanks. Hope to see you next time.